there is a lot of stuff out there that is not anyway realistic, and it's become the norm, right? We're outrunning fireballs, we're jumping off buildings down 50 feet, landing on our feet and dusting ourselves off. There's a place for that. If you're just a pure action flick, that's what you're expecting, right?
I feel like you're pointing your finger at me.
I'm not. I'm not crashing a submarine.
Welcome to the Two Authors Podcast, an entertaining chat show hosted by best-selling mystery and thriller authors Douglas Pratt and Nicholas Harvey, in lively, humorous and informative conversation with distinguished guests who share their thoughts and experience about forging a successful author career.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Glad to have you all with us today. How are you, Mr. Nick?
I'm great. It's good to be recording again, and we've got a great guest coming on, huh?
Yes, we do. Yes, Jason Kasper, best-selling author and all-around badass.
All right, we got a listener question? What we got?
We do, yes. This one actually comes from Jordan McKnight out of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. Our question from Ms. McKnight is, what has been your most challenging hurdle in the writing or publishing process, and how did you overcome it? She has a follow-up question, too. So how do you overcome a major failure or stumbling block? So go with the first one first, which is, what has been your most challenging hurdle?
It feels like the self-publishing author, I shouldn't say self-publishing because I think it's for all authors. The whole thing has been a series of hurdles. In fact, it's nothing but hurdles. And I'm waiting for the flat ground in between where I can just run for a bit without having to jump over a hurdle. Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge is the fact that writing the books is easy. The rest of it is hard. So the writing of the books is the fun part, and it's generally the easy part. It doesn't feel that way when you write your first book or even your second book, but it is. The business side of it is by far harder.
Mine, I would say, yes, you're right about that. I also feel like a lot of people, the initial hurdle of actually realizing you can do it and it is an attainable thing for anybody who has a desire or wants to write or, can string 3 words together, that they could actually do this with the right amount of work. I mean, you have to understand there's work to it, but just to know that you can do it. I think that was one of the biggest hurdles for me, was just realizing this is a possibility. Anybody can do this. So that's the big one. So now their follow-up question, let's see, have you ever had how do you overcome a major failure or stumbling block?
For me personally, the way I deal with that stuff is I have to have a plan. So once I realize I've fallen on my face, I dust myself off as best I can, and then I have to come up with a plan. And a lot of the time it's recognizing why I tripped over that prior hurdle and fell on my face so that I can try and avoid that again. And it's surprising. You know, like I said, it's nothing but hurdles doing this game. So you're going to be picking yourself up a bunch. It's that idea that I feel like the perspective of the general public about authors is one of two things, is either, Clive Cussler or a Tom Clancy or whoever, you're on your yacht or in your mansion somewhere and you write occasionally when you wander downstairs with a martini in your hand and you write. So there's that side of things. And if they meet me, they know I'm not that. And then the other group of general public are like, oh, can you make a living doing that? And for 90-something% of people writing books and publishing books, the answer is no. But fortunately for some of us, and there's a lot of people far above where I am, that's for sure. Yes, you can, but it's a massive amount of work. And it's not a case of, oh, I feel like I'm writing today. You have to write pretty much every day, and especially in the indie world. But even in the publishers now, that a lot of the people that are going through publishers, some of these people like Storm and Bookouture, Seven Rivers Publishing, who our guest is with, they're expecting a lot more output these days because that's the way it works. The readers want to see there's so much competition out there. You need to keep your name in front of people. You want content, so you've got to keep the books going out. So it's, but for me, it's a plan. I have to have a plan. I have to look at what went wrong, figure out what I did wrong, how I can fix that, and what direction I need to go. And I'm goal orientated. So if I have a plan, then there's a goal at the end of it and I'm working towards something, and that's how I overcome it.
I mean, you're absolutely right about that. But I think also kind of go back to what I said a minute ago, it's also not staying down. It's, you fall off a horse, you got to get back up or you'll never ride a horse. Some of those stumbling blocks early on in my career were, there were books that just didn't sell. I mean, I have a whole series that I never could get off the ground. You get bad reviews. Those can feel like stumbling blocks. You have to kind of just keep pushing back and getting back up on the horse and trying again, until the horse is dead, I guess.
Until the horse is dead. And then you say I won because my horse is dead.
Horse is dead. Well, I mean, I guess so. At that point, you're down. I'm just saying that I think that until you just don't keep going, like it's if you're using a goal of I want to be a writer, and I think that yes, there's 90% of the writers out there, authors out there, aren't making a full-time living at it. However, I also think that 90% could make a full-time living at it if they wanted to work at it. And you have to realize that that's not work.
Or they're in the process of doing that work.
Or they're getting it, yes, yeah. But if they often get discouraged. So, I've known authors. There are authors. I published my first book in 2011. There are authors who are making it huge in 2011, 12, 13 that are no longer on the scene. I don't know why. Some of them probably just, maybe they got tired of writing. It was one of those things. But, so I don't know where they are, but what causes them to fall down. But I think if you want to keep going, you're going to have to keep writing, And for me, I enjoy writing. So I'm going to write till I die, probably. So you're going to have to finish my book, whatever book I'm working on. They'll just, have to be the one that finishes it for me. So.
I'll gladly do it. Although I'm probably going to take myself out of this planet before you do.
So,
all right. Who we got coming on? Who are we talking to?
Oh, today we have, like I said, Jason Kasper. And Jason he's more than just an author, guys. Like, listen, this man's a hero. He started out serving in the Army Rangers, ended up as a Green Beret. Like, he has fought over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Dude is like, he's an avid marathoner.
He's an ultra marathon runner. Yeah.
Not like you and I where we're marathoning, Breaking Bad. He's like running, like actually running, Not like we do. And then he's a base jumper and a skydiver. Man is a genius, and he takes all that and he puts it into all of his books, which are just pure action. Great books. So get ready. And me have Jason come on now. And welcome to the show, Jason. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, give us a little bit of background. How did you get involved in writing? We mentioned you had a military background, so tell us just a bit about that and how did you start writing?
Yeah, I've been in the Army since I was I joined when I was 18, right after high school, and then ended up going to West Point, did a bunch of, kind of went through a crazy adrenaline junkie phase. And it was during that time I kind of just became a closet writer. It started just me documenting base jumps and things like that and getting increasingly introspective about it. Found that I really liked writing, thought I'd try my hand at fiction. So I just sat down one day and wrote what is now like the first chapter of my first book. And I ended up finishing up my military time. I was a closet writer for about 10 years that I was advised never to speak of because the community can tend to be pretty memoir sensitive unless you're a Navy SEAL, apparently, in which case it's cool.
It's open season.
Oh, yeah. And then I got out of the military late 2016, like the day I took off my uniform. I just hit self-publish on Amazon with my first book and been doing it full time from there.
Obviously, we kind of want to talk to you about your history and how you're using that to put a little more action and adventure into your books. You were in the Army, you're a skydiver, you do kind of like everything, looks like. So I guess it's just like, how does that influence what you're writing?
It's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, writing predominantly military thrillers, which is what I do now. The elements of authenticity definitely come second nature. It's easy. People always assume my stuff is like a underground hidden memoir. Like it's not, it's all fiction, but, it's pretty easy to picture yourself in a particular setting, what the guys would do tactically, how they'd overcome challenges, what can go wrong. But I think 99.9% of readers are not, combat vets or law enforcement vets or anything like that. So they may or may not appreciate those elements of authenticity. Most do. And, I've got a really dedicated reader base that really enjoys that kind of authentic military thriller that's not like the one, superhero level 10 black belt and 3 different martial arts who just, drop kicks his way across the stage, to a backdrop of explosions. But I do get my fair share of like 1-star reviews from occasionally hate mail from people who don't have a background in it, but they've read enough books and seen enough movies to know what they think it is. And then they try to call me out on tactical details or, how certain parts of the CIA work. And like, you take the good with the bad, but I think most people are conditioned to kind of, thriller authors with no experience in that realm. That's the double-edged sword part of it.
It is pretty incredible how people are so dogmatic about things they don't know shit about. But I think having been there and done so much of this stuff, that authenticity, that's got to come across. I write a lot of, about scuba diving because we're big into that. So I have a lot of followers that are divers. Like you said, the majority of your authors are probably not. They're people that enjoy reading about it, dreaming about it, thinking about it, or have tried it at some point or another. But that authenticity comes across and you get the kudos from the people who really know. And that must be very rewarding to get a note or two from a military person going, yeah, that's real.
That's about the most rewarding thing about it is, hearing from like guys going back to like Vietnam vets that are like, yeah, this is it. Like, felt like I was there. Thank you for like doing justice to it. And then up to like current, like my generation of veterans and everything, like people who can relate to it. That's probably the best part of the process. And that's really like the crowd that I'm writing for, the people who pick up on that authenticity and find it, potentially cathartic in a way or at a minimum entertaining.
It's very entertaining. It's always kind of fun to read that excitement and adventure that goes on in that. So when you think about what you're writing and you get to that action scenes and stuff, I mean, how much do you think how accurate do you write it, or is there any over exaggeration? And I say that like somebody who writes action too, and sometimes I'm like, I wonder if that's really possible,
Yeah. So for the military thriller stuff I write, Shadow Strike currently, the Shadow Strike series, I don't take any crazy liberties with the stuff that's out there, the technologies and the tactics that are out there. I do like what is not realistic about is like how much goes wrong in one book. A lot of stuff can go wrong on mission, but generally like the number of challenges and the variety of challenges that these characters get thrown at them over the course of a single book far exceeds ideally what would occur. Like if that occurred in real life, it would be like a major historic thing. But yeah, doing that book after book after book is part of the challenge for me. And then it's what makes a compelling narrative.
That's a challenge, right? You've got to come up with a new situation every time. An environment's got to change, the situation, their challenge, weaponry, what the bad guys are trying to do, what they're trying to get out of. When you've written a few books, that starts to become a challenge of coming up with something new.
Oh, yeah. The mountain's getting steeper for me now because I did, 6 books in American Mercenary. I'm starting book 9 in Shadow Strike. And it's getting to the point where it's like, at one point, every book, you can change operational environment, put it in a new country, which brings a new host of violent extremist organizations, terrorists, et cetera. But at this point, like I've written jungle, mountains, desert, Arctic, jungle, mountains, desert, mountains, that's definitely part of the challenge. And I think for me, I'm going to take my current series out to 10 books. I got a couple more. And then I'm going to start a new series that'll kind of help like challenge me to broaden my horizons a bit more. Because that was one of the things with the Spider Heist series. Obviously I've never been a professional thief, but I wanted to kind of expand my comfort zone, challenge myself.
So you say.
So yeah. I say, right?
I just read Spider Heist last week before we talked. I just sat there and read it in like 3 hours. I was like, it was a great book. I love a good heist book anyway. And I was like, this is phenomenal. So yeah, very action, and yeah, and that is a challenge. I know, Nick, all of yours take place underwater, so you're going to have to bring in some deserts.
It's a challenge in my AJ series because there's diving in every one, and you start, she's been in wrecks, caverns, everything you can think of under. You start running it. Literally, I'm sympathizing. I'm on book 15, you're about to write 16, and it's like, okay, what now? What else can we do? What else can go wrong underwater?
More sharks. Bring in more sharks. You're good.
You talk about authenticity. I've got a diver following. So when sharks just come around and start molesting people, I don't write that because that's not what happens. It's not. And it's, I don't want to scare people out of scuba diving, but you end up pushing things. And one of the points you always have to do is shit has to go wrong. It's a really boring book if it all goes right. So in the diving scenes, for me, I have people send me a note and go, well, she shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Well, that's the point, right? Something has to go wrong at some point.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I find endlessly interesting about writing is, everybody talks about Deus Ex Machina, something coming in to save your characters, like the ultimate writer sin. But like, if you have Satan Ex Machina, like I think if I've had like environment, like Spider Heist, like the weather becomes like a villain working against them. Like any set of terrible circumstances you can throw at them. Like if you tried to reverse it, like did this come out of nowhere? Was it, like nobody cares because it's making the story more compelling. But you can't have anything come in to help them. That's for sure. It's funny how it works in reverse quite well.
So when you do start writing like these action scenes and stuff, how do you approach one of those? Like I find myself just driving around going, ooh, I wonder if I could kill somebody on a train, and that kind of thing. But like, do you think about how you're going to craft it and plan out each scene like individually, like as you're plotting, which I guess is a question is, are you a plotter or a pantser? But it feels like you might be a plotter. So.
Yeah, I'm very much a plotter. But yeah, generally when I plot, the action set pieces and plotting don't go much beyond this is what I need to happen. They gain control of the MacGuffin. They lose control of the MacGuffin. They, get ambushed, get engaged, or they conduct an ambush. So, or like, a pursuit toward the bad guys, race away from the bad guys. So I generally plan it broadly. And then once I'm in the writing process and I come to that point, I sit down and get very granular with what's the setting, what can go right, what can go wrong, how to use the setting to maximum effect, how to use as many elements possible in the setting. But action set pieces, honestly, that's the easiest part of my day. They just flow. Minimal rewriting required. That's what comes naturally. If I have to write dialogue between like my main character and his wife at home for one of those few scenes, that's like agony. That's like I really have to like sit down and work at that.
So you're a plotter. So you plan out the book and you drop in. I'm going to have action scenes here. I'm going to have them here. Have you found a tempo that works for you? Like I'm going to go 5 chapters and I need to have some action. I'm going to go, or 3 chapters. Do you have beats in there? That's a timing. That's a formula that you find works for you?
Yeah. So what I do is kind of a combination of Save the Cat and Robert McKee. So for the Save the Cat, in the original book, I thought was garbage. Like Blake Snyder's book, he identified the points, but I thought the book was very weak. But Jessica Brody's franchise book, Save the Cat, writes a novel that was extremely insightful, and she breaks down like a corkboard structure to have the plot beats across it. I don't follow them rigidly. Like if something doesn't apply, I completely leave it out, but I start with that corkboard with the plot beats mapped out, and it just helps me kind of visualize the story from start to finish, or I'll have an idea for midpoint, idea for the beginning, and then just seeing how to flesh things out in between that in broad strokes really works for me. And then I kind of put in act breaks, like not Save the Cat, Act 1, Act 2A, 2B, Act 3. I don't do 3-act structure. I do like how McKee would define acts as a major turning point in the story. I generally have 5 to 6. I delineate those on the board, and then I go to basically color-coded note cards, more towards Robert McKee, what he advocates for at the end of his book story. And then I do a note card each for the act, like Act 1 through 5. What's the polarity shift? What is the turning point where that happens? I don't map below that until I have my acts laid out. Then I go to sequences, 3 to 5 scenes resulting in a moderate turning point. And I do a separate colored note card underneath the act card for each sequence. So broader strokes. Once I have the sequences down, then I'll spread it out again and do color-coded note cards for scenes, which again, sequences and scenes generally I'll map out what's the polarity shift, plan to no plan, life to death, like whatever the specific polarity is, and the turning point being the exact moment that happens. And that helps me stay focused. So if you take an act 1 turning point that the act turns on is the same as the turning point for the last sequence in that act. And then the last scene in that sequence, the turning point is the same as for the sequence and the act respectively. So I generally map it out like that. And that kind of helps keep me structured because it's just easy to follow too many rabbit holes when you're plotting, at least for me. So just seeing it down to that structure, that gets me through to my outline.
I think you got Nick a little excited there with all that plotting because he loves that stuff.
I was thinking you plot with military precision.
It's very, wow, yeah.
Very detailed. And yeah, it reminds me of D.D. Black we interviewed last year, a fantastic author. And he plots down to that detail, actually deeper into the detail of each scene. So his plotting is his writing of the book. The actual filling in of the words within the chapters, he said, is his boring part for him because he's got it all mapped out. And one of the questions I had for him, which I want to share with you, is what happens when you're actually, now you're writing a book, you're working off your plot, and you go, oh man, it would be fantastic if we did this here. Is there room within your plotting to move that way and adjust?
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing I've noticed. The further I go along in my career, the more generalized my plotting is, because I've found over the years, like if I plot down to the level I just described to you guys, it might be 80% accurate. It might only be 50% accurate. So I plot pretty generally. And the good thing about having a system, whatever your system is you get reps on it with each successive book. You kind of go through it quicker and quicker. So like the note cards I described, like I used to spend 2 weeks on that. Now it might be a day, maybe 2. So I plot through very quick. I try to keep everything fast and loose generally in the plotting stage because I know how much changes along the way. But yeah, I definitely keep flexibility for changing. And if I ever come up with a better mousetrap in the writing process, I always do. Like Vince Gilligan has a very insightful quote on this. And he talked about entire seasons of Breaking Bad where the plot just went off the rails. And he says, you have to be willing to sacrifice the good for the great. Shadow Strike Book 4, I can tell you, like the entire second half of the book, I threw out what I had, took it in a whole new direction, still got to the same ending. But yeah, I 100% leave myself flexibility. Whenever a better idea occurs, I take it and run with it. And that's why my plotting becomes more generalized. I do the same process every time. I do it quicker, but I don't get down to the granular level of detail that I know is going to emerge as I start writing scenes, start conducting further research into it.
So, well, as you've been writing so many books now, have you gotten to an action scene that you've been working on in your head, something that you'd like to write that you haven't done yet? Action scene, an event, a place that you want to put something? Is there like the dream thought that you're like, I can't wait to put that down and I just got to find the right story for it?
Yeah, definitely. Currently, I've got a certain very non-permissive country that I've wanted to write for a long, long time. And I'll have the opportunity at the end of my current series, but very evident in Spider Heist. In that series, I wanted to write a bank robbery. I wanted to write a breakout from Supermax prison. I wanted to write stealing something from the most secure vault in the world, which this real world security expert proposed hypothetically would be a vault built into the side of a building, observed from all sides in a major high rise, one way in, one way out. Like, how would you break into that? And like that became the plot of The Sky Thieves, So I think I had it more in the heist realm than I have it in the military thriller realm. In the military thriller space, it's more like what region or country, like what contested area that provides the maximum possible pressure. Like that's the draw in military.
With the military stuff, there's so much going on in the world, political unrest and all this kind of thing. Do you pay attention and follow that stuff? So the countries you're using and, the bad guys of that year, or do you try and stay away from that and either follow behind it or just ignore it completely? What's your kind of process?
I generally ignore it, right? I become interested in it the moment, like I decide to write a country independently. Like I want a certain region based on like the general dynamics. And then as I get into plotting that and researching, I try to bring in as many elements as possible of, what is the historical background? What U.S. policy decisions have influenced this country, positively or negatively, and try to shine some light on that. So there's a little bit, it's not a heavy drive. It's not Michael Crichton, but I try to insert there's an educational aspect to it too for the reader and myself to learn about it and depict these areas accurately. But yeah, I don't do any ripped from the headlines. My book 6 in Shadow Strike for years, I was going to do Ukraine. Then obviously Putin got a little crazy and I stripped threw that whole plot out and rewrote it, ended up doing Serbia. And the book might have been better for it, but I don't do current breaking emergent stuff because I want the books to be sort of timeless is a strong word, but I don't want to date the work. I want a Vietnam veteran, a global war on terrorism veteran, a veteran from whatever hopeless insurgency our country mires us in sometime within my lifetime in the future. I want them to be able to read it and kind of get the essence of the war fighter, the fallout, the decisions, the darkness that follows you after that. Like that's what I'm more focused on than anything from the news.
I think that's great. That's the downfall, right? It's somebody who picks up this book in 4 years' time, and especially with these conflicts the way they are now, they're swinging around. Who's the good guy, who's the bad guy exactly?
How can you keep up?
Yeah, how do you keep up? So I think that's a great policy. Doug, what were you going to ask about the heist stuff?
Well, I was going to ask, because you said you talked to some security consultant. How much research? I mean, obviously you have plenty of military background, but you said you don't have any heist background. So what kind of research are you doing, and how is that versus the practical knowledge you already have, and compare it, to get the kind of information you're looking for?
So the area of overlap was really the teamwork factor. Like I said, I have yet to write, a single hero. Who's maybe my first series. I got into it a bit. But for the most part, Shadow Strike, Spider Heist, there's like a team of people, which, kind of reflects how things are in the military. You have a tight-knit group of guys, extreme loyalty, who are doing things often in opposition to the bureaucracy. That's something that's been hard for me to get away from. That is common between military and heist. Everything else for heist was pretty much original, other than the tactical decision-making. That was uncharted terrain for me. I did a lot of research into historical major heists, actual like heist crews that have operated worldwide. What were their tactics? I did a lot of research into like unsolved heists, also a lot into like the security aspect of it. So the good thing about it is there's no professional thief and no security experts, and to come in, it's like, that's not how it works, because everything's so tightly compartmentalized for the security side. But being able to research most of the technologies that I could research are not dated, but they're certainly common knowledge, open source. And then there'd be a lot of envisioning on my part for extrapolating what would the progression of the system be, what would be the ways to crack it. And then I went from there. Also a bit of urban exploring. I don't know if you're familiar, but apparently there's people who like sneak into different sites and abandoned buildings and sewers. And that's legit like a hobby, like base jumping. I did some research into that. Because like, what are the tenets of those guys sneaking in and out? What do they do when they get caught? They've actually got like evasion protocols and best practices for when you're on the run from security. And that provided some really helpful insight as well.
So the base jumping, what's the lowest height you've base jumped from? What is the lowest height you can and still get a parachute to open?
Lowest I've jumped from was 205 feet.
God, that's low.
Yeah, the lowest stuff people are doing is, last I heard, was 150, maybe 130, but that's generally with like very specialized equipment. Like you've got a custom low altitude parachute. You're generally doing like a static line jump, and you're lucky to get a canopy overhead. Like generally it's considered, if you're jumping 200 feet or 250 feet over hard earth, like at some point, like a parachute delay is going to get you. You're assuming a lot of risk over the long term to be doing that repeatedly.
Was that something you were trained for in the military, or you picked up afterwards or on the side?
I picked it up on the side.
I follow a couple of guys online who do some of that, and it's more power to you. I've done some crazy shit in my life, but I'm not doing that.
Oh, yeah. And the stuff I did was a far cry from like the Instagram, like wingsuit proximity flying down canyons. That stuff boggles my mind. But those dudes have, thousands of jumps, if not 10,000 or more.
I think they have a low life expectancy too. I mean, the margin, right? The margin is so tiny.
I actually put a wingsuit in the book I'm writing now, and I did some research on that, and I was watching these people, like the crashes alone were left me go, yeah, no, I don't think I want to be flying off like that, Oof.
That's where it's good to be an author. And you can okay, I'm good observing it from here, getting some of the research, narrating it, but I don't need to get out there and throw on the squirrel suit myself.
I'm all in for the get the personal experience and write from personal experience, except for some things.
So let me ask you this. What is your author superpower?
Action set pieces. That's my superpower. That's what I can jam all day. I don't know why. It's always been that way, but the downside is my shortcoming is any kind of domestic family scenes, anything non-tactical, not occurring on mission is extremely difficult for me. And that's something I want to work on probably in my next series, because there's precious few opportunities in the military thriller space.
You need a husband and wife who work together as operatives, and then they can do domestic and action at the same time.
Yeah, I'll take Mr. and Mrs. Smith, spin it slightly, and everybody will love it.
Yeah. We're writing a series together, which is the Green Wolf series, and they're siblings. I can tell you, it's a lot of fun writing with Doug. We're working on Missy and Zanzibar right now. But taking the two siblings and having these action scenes with them and then having them on the side interacting with each other, it's a lot of fun. So it's a fun way of writing. So do you write your military personnel when you do have to do a domestic scene? Do you write them as being awkward military guys who don't interact outside of their group of friends very well?
Yeah. So there's not a huge component of that in Shadow Strike, but it is a lot of it's related to like this guy, having trouble adjusting to normal society, dinner parties where it's polite conversation with, regular people devoid of adrenaline or anybody with any discernible darkness from their experiences in combat. But it's a good way to counterpoint and show the kind of the fallout and the effects on personalities and human beings who've been exposed to a lot of warfare. So right now it's definitely like just I do it as needed, but it's not a heavy part of the series at all.
I think that's great, though. Embrace that, because that's it. Again, it's authentic, right?
Yeah, that's what really resonates with like combat vets. My experience from the correspondence I've gotten, like they like that human connection between somebody writing the way they feel.
All right, we've got a final question. We have a fancy little wheel we're going to spin.
That is fancy.
We only got it for the sound effect. I keep telling about it. It does that. So you get the last question. It's just random questions.
How much did I win?
Okay, so this one is, what book are you reading right now?
Oh, God, I'm a terrible person to ask that question to. I don't like reading fiction. Oddly and bizarrely.
No, that fits. That so fits with everything you're writing. I think I understand it completely. Yeah,
when I do read, I have to go like outside my genre. So like I'm not reading a fiction book right now. The last one I read was It by Stephen King. I don't know, for some reason, like when I need a departure from my stuff, I can't do military thrillers at all, but I enjoy reading horror for some reason. So periodically a Stephen King book makes its way in.
Never thought about writing horror? Have you ever thought about jumping genres and doing anything else?
I did bridge the gap a little bit. I had a standalone called Her Dark Silence, which was read by tens of people. But that I did a lot of research into horror genre techniques, and I did a lot of elements of horror. It's a thriller, but it's like an extremely dark thriller. That was about as close as I came. And after that, I was like, I'm good. Like that was when you spend 45 minutes online listening to like death rattles to get the sound right. I'm like, you know what? I'm good with gunfights and shooting people in the face because horror goes to some dark places, man.
Hey, this has been brilliant, Jason. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you for your service, and keep up the great work, and congrats on all the success with your series.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me. I love the spin the dial. That's great. If I ever start a podcast, I'm going to shamelessly plagiarize that because that's perfect. Perfect way to get a final question. Thanks for having me, guys. It's great talking to you.
What a enterprising and dynamic and cool guy. Yeah, I can't imagine what he has seen in the world.
Total badass, right?
Big time. Big time. And one of the things that a theme in chatting with him is writing what you know, right? That old adage, write what you know. And I think that's a challenge if you're passionate about writing military books or police procedurals or romance or whatever it is. But you're like, well, I haven't lived that. I wasn't in the military. I wasn't in the police. I've never dated someone, whatever it might be. Or, hey, I married my high school sweetheart and I'm going to write about this, divorce, breakup, whatever it might be, right? The write what you know doesn't just mean you have to have done it. It means you have to do the research so you know it and understand it.
Yeah, because like you said, he hasn't committed any robberies that we know of, or he's so good we haven't caught him. So
I think him and Angela Marson's lovely Angela, who denied a life of crime. I think maybe Jason and Angela have conspired on some heists.
No, I think that Yeah, you're right. I think that you can take, there's the practical and then there's the research. Like, the practical is what your stuff that you write with, I just read Lighthouse Point where you had all the technical diving, which was, I dive and I don't know all the technical stuff. So it was great to see how you do all of that. And you add in the racing, which I knew nothing about. And I found that fascinating to just sit there and read through it. I had to go back a couple of times because I'm like, the way you tell it is just, is brilliant because you know it and you're into that depth. And if you don't necessarily know everything, you also talked about breaking into a diamond, stealing diamonds and at the very beginning. And I don't think you've ever stolen diamonds, but you have a great scene with that too. So I think a lot of it is just learning and researching, and it's amazing kind of, we as writers joke about what we research. What's the craziest thing I've ever researched? And some of it is scary, some of it's not. And, but I think that's a lot of it is just trying to make sure you want to be as accurate and to have a real feel to what's going on so the story flows better.
Yeah, the authenticity comes across. And there's plenty of shit out there. There's plenty of rubbish, right? There's plenty of people writing stuff that isn't plausible in any way, shape, or form. And there's a huge market for that. And in some genres, it's welcomed, right? Obviously, everything has their tropes and parameters, but fantasy, you open up a whole world because it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be real. To a extent, there's tropes.
Well, it does to its own world, to its tropes and to the world building. If you decide to have magic in it, you can't break the rules of your own magic.
No, that was the point I was going to get to. Is even in those that seem like, well, it's just endless, I can just make up all the shit I want. You can, but there's still parameters. And I do feel like there is in many genres, and especially the things we watch on movies we watch and what have you, there is a lot of stuff out there that is not anyway realistic. And it's become the norm, right? We're outrunning fireballs. We're jumping off buildings down, 50 feet, landing on our feet and dusting ourselves off. There's a place for that. If you're just a pure action flick, that's what you're expecting, right?
I feel like you're pointing your finger at me.
I'm not. I'm not crashing a submarine. There's also a place for having those accuracies, and there's, do the research. And I think, Jason is a perfect example of a guy that's hitting it all right and getting it right. And there's a definite place for that. And I think there's a place for more of that, in my opinion.
I agree.
All right. Great show. What are we doing? We've chatted on too long. So we're working on Missing in Zanzibar, which is when he was talking about the plotting and the laying out and the timing and the stuff. It's something we're learning together as we work together on these books of plotting certainly more than you used to do, probably a little bit more than I currently do, because I plot as I go, and we're having to plot out further ahead and do more with this. It's a great learning process, but Zanzibar is going to be a freaking cool story.
Pretty awesome, yeah. And you and you'll just be glad I keep changing things in the middle of it for you, so it just throws you all off. I know. So.
Yeah, it's like Christmas every day when I get a chapter back. It's like, oh,
you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, boy, I didn't expect that. All right, thank you, Jason.
Oh, yeah. Make sure you leave a review for us and check us out. Follow our show notes and stuff. All the other fun stuff that we do.
Yeah. Until next time, be cool to each other.
Fair winds and following seas.
You've been listening to the Two Authors podcast with Nicholas Harvey and Douglas Pratt. Subscribe on your favourite platform for alerts on new shows coming every 2 weeks.